Hi everyone, this is Jason, producer of Data and Biotech. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know about our latest white paper. It's a comprehensive guide to implementing machine learning models in biotech manufacturing. It's a complete overview of all the potential problems of ML adoption, and more importantly, how to solve them. To download it, simply visit connect.cordine.com/biotech-ML. We've also dropped the link in the show notes of this episode. Okay, let's get into it. Welcome to Data in Biotech, a podcast from Cordine where we explore how companies leverage data to drive innovation in life sciences. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with an expert from the world of biotechnology to understand how they're using data science to solve technical challenges, streamline operations, and further innovation in their business. This week, we're excited to be joined by Joseph Pearson, Global Product Manager of OmicSoft at QIAGEN, a global provider of sample-to-insight solutions that enable customers to gain valuable molecular insights. During this discussion, we dive into OmicSoft, a powerful NGS analysis suite with the ability to quickly explore and compare across 500,000 curated omics samples from disease-related studies. Joseph outlines the challenges of acquiring and analyzing NGS datasets, discusses the different ways customers can interact with OmicSoft data, and unpacks the build versus buy debate when selecting new bioinformatics tools. Here we go.
Joseph Pearson, welcome to the Data and Biotech podcast.
Thanks, Ross. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, just to kick us off, would you just give us a brief introduction to your career and what brought you here today?
Sure. I started out as a longtime academic focused on model organisms. I was working in fruit flies, really interested in gene regulation. So this kind of brought me into my affinity for basic bioinformatics tools, enhancer bashing, and interpreting DNA sequences to understand gene regulatory networks. And kind of through that work, I developed a bit of a knack for explaining bioinformatics concepts to biologists and vice versa. And so, after a long academic career, I joined a small company called OmicSoft, which was just kind of a local bioinformatics company that had started up, and joined their tech support team, which was really kind of a plum job, interacting with customers to help them answer their scientific questions. So it was kind of the best part of bioinformatics, and continued from there.
Awesome. And then, now you're in a product management role at QIAGEN, right? So how did you end up in product management, and what drew you to that part of the tech landscape?
Really just grew into the role. I was on the tech support team for several years, grew into the manager role for that, but it was really the experience interacting with customers that helped me understand what their customer needs were. So I was a pretty good fit for the global product manager for OmicSoft. And so I stepped into that role, and it's just been a great opportunity to learn a lot of new skills that I would not have developed otherwise.
Awesome. And why do you do what you do? What motivated you to go down this path in the first place?
It's really an exciting opportunity to figure out kind of on a day-to-day basis and from a more strategic level how we can make our data and our software more useful for the scientists that I'm working with. So it's, a lot of little decisions, a lot of really big decisions, but there's always a new challenge every day. So, something to look forward to.
Can we talk a little bit about QIAGEN and the OmicSoft product? Maybe just orienting us to QIAGEN as a company, and then how OmicSoft fits into the portfolio of solutions that you all provide would be great.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I suspect that a lot of people are familiar with the QIAGEN name. It's a big global company, very well known for wet lab reagents and the big blue and red boxes you'll see everywhere. And QIAGEN Digital Insights is really this small little division in the context of the large global company. But it's a division that was really purpose-built to cover the spectrum of bioinformatics needs, including bioinformatics pipelines, data analysis, interpretation, data warehousing and management, as well as the underlying resources of high quality, manually curated data and knowledge for basic research as well as for drug discovery. I guess OmicSoft is one little part of the QIAGEN Digital Insights group. So it's, within QIAGEN, there's QIAGEN Digital Insights. QIAGEN Digital Insights has multiple products and product lines, and OmicSoft is one part of that. And our strength is really focused on NGS analysis, especially RNA-seq, and the organization, management, and unification of those NGS datasets for the purpose of scientists actually being able to use those data after they've been generated. So that's what we've kind of focused on over the years.
What I hear is that you're providing NGS datasets that have sort of been cleaned and prepared, but then also a set of tools for analyzing those datasets or for getting value from those datasets.
Yeah, that's basically it. The actual origin of OmicSoft was as a microarray analysis platform, grew into NGS during the NGS revolution, and it kind of developed organically during interactions with our early customers that they were initially asking the OmicSoft team to pre-analyze public data sets under a unified pipeline and maybe clean up these data sets a little bit so that they could use them for larger meta-analyses. And this kind of grew over time organically to the point that we built up this really substantial database of unified data sets and a robust curation protocol and analysis protocol and statistics protocol to bring these data together so that people can just get right into the data analysis. So we've built up the data as well as the tools to interact with those data over many years now.
I'm just anticipating that from the perspective of a customer that uses OmicSoft, it's just, the time to value is one of the key things that you get out of it, that you all have gone through all of the work of preparing the data for analysis and sort of serving it to the researchers in a way that makes it easy for them to get insights from it. And who are the typical customers that you see coming to use it?
I can usually tell in a room who are the people who've actually gone through this painful process. If you look at a data scientist's day of the life, about 80% of their time is actually spent finding the data sets to analyze. About 20% of their day is spent on actually analyzing those data sets. And so if we explain effectively our curation protocol and the data analysis that we've done and the unification and kind of show how much time we've spent ahead of time so they can get to that data analysis stuff, you can see certain people just nodding their heads like, yes, that is what I wish I had 5 years ago.
Maybe it's worth just grounding this in an example of a team in the absence of OmicSoft or in the absence of having the pipeline in place for them. What would be the burden on a group like that, just starting from zero and trying to do everything that you all have done for them?
I mean, it really varies on how big the question is and the type of disease they're looking for, but the standard place to go is one of the public repositories, either a website that has a built portal to look for these data or just a data repository. Find a geo or SRA data set, download the data set, analyze the data set, QC the data set, do the secondary analysis to actually interpret the data set, and then try to match it up with some other data that may be comparable. And then maybe at that point you realize, was it a good quality data set? Was it a good experiment? Or maybe it was kind of iffy. Once you've kind of gone through that process, it's several days to weeks of analysis. And most of our customers are relatively small bioinformatics teams serving a bunch of biologists. And the biologists have these very simple sounding questions. Is this gene expressed in such and such tissue, or is it upregulated in a disease, or is it expressed, or does it have a mutation in a cell line? And so these are very simple sounding questions, but to actually answer that properly takes a lot of work, takes, this whole process. You have to find the data set and make sure there's the right data set to answer that question. And, so this is the difference. They can much of the time just mine our data and use our interfaces to answer those questions in minutes as opposed to weeks.
A couple things come to mind there when you're talking through that example is just that like the scope of the ad hoc requests that could come into a small bioinformatics team like that is relatively broad. So, having kind of the comprehensive data set in place and already cleaned and ready for them in the way that OmicSoft does is sort of a key value proposition of it. And then another thing that I'm hearing is if it's a question about gene expression in a particular tissue sample, then I'm imagining that you have all of the metadata that around each of these NGS data sets ready for the bioinformatics team to very easily answer that question based on the tissue that it came from, for example.
Yeah. And I would say that, for very basic questions, a lot of these questions could be answered using other tools. If you're just looking for an overall view of tissue or disease, you can find public resources that relatively quickly can be mined from a single source. The moment you get either to a more detailed, subtle question, like a treatment response question, or trying to mine additional metadata describing the clinical parameters of the patients or the subjects, or anytime that you're trying to merge multiple data sets, that's where you really run into trouble because everybody uses their own terminologies and ontologies. And so you have to do all that cleanup. In our experience, we find, unfortunately, there are frequent instances where there are clear issues with the data as submitted to the public repositories, sample labels switching the spellings or switching of treatments and times that would actually give you the wrong answer if you just took them at face value.
So you're going through that quality control process and also sort of that metadata validation process on behalf of the clients to go through data set by data set and make sure that the labels are consistent within the ontologies that you're providing and making sure that none of those tags have been flipped as you described?
That is one of the core value propositions that we have, is that we've already done this work so that they don't have to worry about this. And, this has really been built up over time through the years, talking to our customers, what is important. And, they've indicated that it is valuable to have these detailed metadata curations with definitions of the metadata fields and quality control and unification to save them time on this. There are customers who will take our data and they'll reanalyze the actual raw data on their own pipeline because, it's easy to automate that. It is not easy to automate data curation to make it unified. And there are lots of pitfalls in that. So people just like to trust that we've built up that manual curation protocol to catch those errors.
When a potential customer sees a problem where they know they need to go out and acquire a data set to answer either a particular question, or they're growing their bioinformatics capabilities and they know that they need more ad hoc capability to respond to these types of questions for which data doesn't exist yet. How do they evaluate OmicSoft and the tools that you provide when they're considering using it?
The first question is, do you have data that are relevant for my question? That's kind of the nice thing about us building up the databases for so many years, is that we, through working with our customers and filling their customer requests, have built up a pretty good broad collection of data. So there's a good chance that we have robust data that are useful to answer their question. And then we can come back to them and kind of clarify the questions. When you said inflammatory diseases, which of these 57 different specific diseases did you mean? And we can start to talk about the curation protocol. Maybe it's more detailed than they need, and they realize that there are only a couple of data sets that are out there. Or maybe they realize that there's actually a pretty significant amount of data, and they are willing to go through the effort of mining the data. If we provide the data and the tools, they're still going to have to use their bioinformatics expertise to pull out the relevant insights and use their judgment. But if they decide that there's enough data out there and we've saved them time, they will subscribe.
Interesting. And where does the data underlying OmicSoft come from? Are these public data sets that you're cleaning and organizing? Or are they coming from, proprietary data sets that you're licensing?
Almost exclusively public data sets. We're retrieving the same data sets that one could find for themselves, but we are doing a lot of additional work on those data sets to actually make them unified. We do have some partnerships with proprietary data sets. For example, the collection of cell lines that are certified. So a nice value from that is that people can mine all of our other cell line data that we've curated and unified, and then discover the ATCC verified cell lines that match those same data, and actually check at the metadata level and at the gene expression and mutation level. Do these actually match up? And because these ATCC data have been generated under ISO standards from validated lots, you can guarantee that the aliquot that you get from ATCC will match the ATCC gene expression profile that we have in the lands.
That's sort of a team of people that you have in-house that are sort of monitoring the new data sets that are becoming available, any research that's being released, and then manually cleaning and integrating the data sets into OmicSoft? Or, how does that process work from your perspective?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. We do have a team who are monitoring for new interesting data sets and routinely do searches for keywords from past requests from customers. But we strongly encourage our customers to send in requests of their own. We like to prioritize those and get them in as quickly as possible because those are the data that are relevant to them. And then we'll use that to guide our future searches to find new data sets that are important.
Is there like a turnaround time that your customers generally expect or hope for when they make a request for a new data set? Or is it just kind of, depend on the complexity of the data set and, the number of people that are sort of shouting for it?
They would always like it to be faster, but it does take a little bit of time to curate these data sets and unify them into the next release of the database. We have a well-established quarterly release cycle, but we absolutely can do accelerated turnaround for specific customer requests. It's a custom service.
From the perspective of the bioinformatics team or, the data science team, how are they interacting with these data sets? You mentioned a database. Are they querying a database, or are they using, the programming language of their choice to interact with an API? How does it look?
It really depends on the user. We provide a couple of different ways to access the data, ranging from pre-built graphical user interfaces that have really been purpose-built around the structure of the data. So heavy clients and web-based access. That's great for quick lookups of a gene's expression or to find a specific data set. For the occasional lookup, for the more advanced use case, people are usually just asking for an API, programmatic access, to get into the data. And that's the way that you can really slice and dice through the data and find data sets of interest, build custom cohorts across the data sets, do custom analyses, aggregating data sets and doing statistics on the server, as opposed to actually having to download everything. But we also provide full flat files. We have customers who are just using us as a data provider. They bring it into their own database. So it's really about the use case. We have customers who are doing all three because they have different user groups, or even just, from the day, do I want to do a quick lookup, or do I want to do a robust analysis, or do I want to build a custom model on these data?
Right. So I'm imagining if there's an ad hoc request that just needs the fastest possible answer, then you go to the user interface and you get the answer as quickly as you can. But if you're talking about sort of building data infrastructure and data capabilities for the long term, interacting with the data, then maybe you want that more programmatic integration where you're bringing the data down into your own environment and sort of aligning it with the data sets that you're collecting as a biotech organization. Am I thinking about that right?
Yes. And that's really been the feedback from customers is that they want that kind of flexibility. They don't like things to be walled off, but they do like the guardrails and the kind of the simplified interface for those quick lookup.
Have there been any sort of like surprising integrations or surprising applications you've seen of either the tools that you provided for analysis or the data sets that you're providing?
I would guess that some of the more interesting integrations were using the APIs, where we were kind of surprised how quickly certain people really glommed on to the idea of the more powerful APIs to use SQL-based queries to slice and dice and aggregate on the data. These were people and customers that had access to the full flat files for years. They could have been doing these analyses just by downloading gigabytes of data as tabular storage. But once we provided the access to the data through APIs, querying on our hosted side, they could really focus on the scripting side as opposed to the database management side.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it sounds like there's a SQL interface that's sort of integrated with the API. And so, you can sort of, do your aggregations and do your filters directly in that API call. And it's sort of flexible to all of the fields that you have available in the database that you expose via the API. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, that's basically right. One of the kind of fun, inventive aspects of these new APIs is that we've been able to reapply some of the visualizations and analytics that were built up from customer request in the kind of the heavy software. And we've been able to kind of rethink about how to answer the customer question, not just re-implement the algorithm or the tool, but say, what is the customer question that they're trying to answer? And our very talented developers and QIAGEN have come up with very clever solutions on efficiently doing this with a simple API query. So you can search over lots of data at the same time and pull out aggregations and correlations, differential expression analyses, mutation frequency summaries, all kinds of ways to aggregate the data. And this basically builds up a little toolkit that the users, that our customers can then take and just kind of plug and play.
Imagining that there's just, kind of a big customer education component to what you have to do, because there's so many questions that you can ask of the data. And also when you talk about, exposing sort of a SQL-based API, there's, teaching people how to use SQL, how to query the database, like what the limitations are on what they're allowed to query and like how much they're allowed to query based on the plans that they're at. How do you approach that kind of customer education problem?
It's not my approach. It's the QIAGEN Digital Insights approach to have a dedicated team of very talented scientists that are really focused on engaging with those customers, talking to them. They are, first of all, our eyes and ears. When a customer has a complaint or they have a new feature, these application scientists are bringing it to the product managers to prioritize. And then they are also the ones presenting how to answer specific questions to the customers. So, it's really about that high frequency interaction to make our customers feel like it's a partnership, not just a vendor client relationship.
That makes sense. So, when that ad hoc request comes into the bioinformatics team and it's a question that they don't know how to access the data that's needed to answer that question, they're, talking to someone at the digital insights team that, helping them sort of wade through all of the data that you have available and finding the right query that's going to get them the data set they need to, go and analyze it.
I don't think there's an application scientist on the team that doesn't love to have the answer at their fingertips. So it's a point of pride that if they don't know how to do something, they are going to find the person who will help them understand. And then they can explain to the customer, make the customer feel like they're a superstar.
You've already kind of shared an example of an ad hoc request that came through, but can you share some practical use cases companies have executed using the OmicSoft product?
Sure. I don't think it's unique to the OmicSoft product. It's any time that a customer wants to ask a question of omics data, it's really one of two types of question. Where is my gene expressed, mutated, amplified, deleted, whatever your omic measure is in such and such data set, treatment, tissue, disease, cell type, whatever the cohort is, but it's, where is my specific gene expressed? The second question is, what are the important genes for my tissue, treatment, disease, cell type, whatever? Each of those questions start with a big matrix of data that you whittle down to find what's going to answer your question. And then the details come into, how you're specifically going to mine the data to decide, is this actually giving me the answer that is helpful to go to my next step? Because of the unification of any sort of database, and this is why people build an integrated database in the first place, is that you can do analyses across. So whether you're building your own or you're subscribing to a database and software solution like OmicSoft provides, the big benefit is the downstream analytics that you can perform on these data. So it's not just finding that slice of data, but it's looking for correlations and analyses on these data, doing new custom statistical analyses on these, and then sending to the next step in your pipeline.
I can imagine that there's a startup or a scale-up biotech organization that's building up this bioinformatics capability, and they're focused on, a particular therapeutic area, for example, and, they're trying to decide whether to build the capabilities that you have in OmicSoft in-house or whether to buy into the platform to get access to the data and sort of leverage all of the time and effort and energy that went into the development of your platform to get them faster along their path to value. Can you help us think through how does a company like that make the build versus buy decision in that context?
To try not to be too glib about it, but I would say that it comes down to whether the person in charge of this data management, warehousing, mining has been burned before by a build it yourself approach. If they've tried it and they realize that it's actually a lot harder than they thought to maintain it, then they start to look for custom solutions. So we've seen people go both ways from, start build it yourself and then come to us and say, okay, actually, we could use this solution. And sometimes they'll come in and say, yeah, I would like to save the time upfront by using a turnkey solution. And then they realize that they need a little bit more customization and would rather just use the raw data. That goes back to the feedback that we've gotten from customers for years about the flexibility. They need access at different levels, flat files to just integrate into their own database, all the way through a pre-built solution that just visualizes the data. They don't have to do any coding at all.
What are some of those nightmare scenarios that someone who's starting up a bioinformatics practice might not be aware of that you've seen people come back and see the value of OmicSoft to avoid?
The telltale signs are either that they have some sort of very complex internally built solution using a bunch of freeware components, and the person who built it left without documenting enough. And so they're kind of stuck with this solution that they just can't put any new data in, or they can't update it. Or they've just gone the old school route and they've got folders full of Excel files.
And where does that leave them with the folders full of Excel files?
They basically are stuck with all of these data, and they can't actually do anything with them unless they just open up the Excel file, discover that many of their genes have been converted into dates, or there was a drag and drop mistake, or there's just no version control. So there's just all sorts of problems that you discover once you start to actually try to integrate these data.
Yeah, I can imagine there's also sort of a curse of success here where, if you're one of these, smaller biotech organizations that you've done it with a small bioinformatics team, you managed to build the data platform that you needed, but that now you're responsible for maintaining it in perpetuity. And, there's just this constant flow of new data that you want to bring in. And to the point you just made, now you're spending all of this time just managing data infrastructure or maintaining data infrastructure when what you really want to be doing is driving value from the data that's running through that system. Am I hearing that?
That's
right?
That is absolutely a path that we've seen, and some people will decide to bring in some sort of solution. Maybe it's not even a full redesigned solution, but just work with the QIAGEN Digital Insights Services team on modifying or integrating our data to work better with their internal pipeline. There are lots of different ways to kind of freshen up an internal data lake or interface.
Does the size or maturity of the organization play a role in the decision to build versus buy in this context?
Maybe it's a little bit of an hourglass, right? Some sort of multimodal shape where if you're too small, it's not worth the effort of actually subscribing. It's just better to just do an ad hoc download and analyze the data. There's a certain size where you realize that you're actually building up some internal data resources that you want to integrate with public data. And it's going to actually be quite a lot of effort. You may have to hire another person, or you can subscribe to software and free up the existing team to do the work. And then as you get to a big enough organization, you could make the decision to build an internal framework that's really custom built towards your solution. But what we see frequently is that even the big organizations are very siloized, very fragmented. They don't talk a lot. They have different opinions. And so they're less unified than you would imagine looking from the outside.
Interesting. So, as a product manager, I imagine you get exposed to a lot of customer feedback, or as a head of product management. I'm interested in what are some of the biggest challenges or criticisms, like challenges with or criticisms of the platform that you hear from customers?
The data are complex, but occasional users want the data to be simple. And so, there's always a bit of a learning curve to introduce to any sort of client. And so you can either build more and more customizations to make it simple for the new user, or you can focus on bringing in new data and data types, or you can add in more advanced capabilities for the advanced users. And that's one of the challenges, but also one of the joys of being a product manager is understanding, what's actually going to help people do their job better and move targets down the discovery chain faster.
Yeah, and I can imagine that you have to think through these problems and like the different ways that they can be solved. And so you've mentioned this really strong, service and support organization that you have that's, helping with the customer education component. And so I'm imagining that there's always this decision criteria of, is this something that needs to be built into the technology platform, or is this something where we just need to do a better job of educating our customers about how to leverage the tools that we provide today? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's really easy to lean on the crutch of our fantastic field application scientist teams and tech support teams to say, user education is all that's needed. We just need to train, maybe improve the documentation, but we do need to update the tools and make them actually easier to use for the new users, and while at the same time bringing in more capabilities for the advanced users who want to, mine every last bit of useful information from the data.
OmicSoft is a part of this portfolio of products and services that QIAGEN provides. And I'm just interested in, how does OmicSoft fit into the QIAGEN portfolio, and what sort of differentiates it from some of the other tools that are available?
Yeah. So that's actually part of the trick is, each of these components of the portfolio came in initially as its own independent company, and it was brought in because of its unique strengths, but there are always going to be overlaps. There are some overlaps, and then there's some distinct features, focusing on different user personas, target markets, and so forth. But every day there's some sort of decision about a roadmap item or some feature that could overlap with another feature from another product. that we have to decide, okay, is this something that we want to continue to improve, or should we start thinking about a better way to integrate? And that's really one of the focuses right now in QIAGEN Digital Insights, is to bring the data together, bring the software together to interplay a lot better and really focus on our strengths to bring a more unified solution for the users, so they don't have to decide what's the best path or which product to bring in. And we definitely don't want them to buy redundant products.
So is that a part of the sort of sales intake process, is sort of routing the customer problem to the right product? Or is that also a challenge for marketing organization to figure out what are the specific pain points and the customer problems that each of these products is designed to solve?
That is all part of, it's the responsibility of the sales team, the marketing team, the product team, how to effectively communicate clearly what the value is, so that there's as little customer confusion as possible, because the confused mind says no. And even if they said yes, if they come in and they didn't get exactly what they thought they were buying, there's going to be frustration there. So we want to make sure that they know exactly what they're getting, and that what they're getting is going to solve their problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. You come from this experienced biology background. You've done bioinformatic research work before, and you've been on the front lines dealing with customer problems before. How have these experiences sort of colored your view of the challenges you face in your role in product management?
I guess on the positive side, I really enjoy actually building the use cases and telling stories about what you can actually do with the data and the software. And I can communicate that pretty effectively. On the other side, I really want to include everything. If there's an exciting new technology, a new application, new data types, I can see how cool that is, and how we could integrate it in this way. Let's add these new capabilities. And you have to be very disciplined, have that kind of ruthless focus. And what is the thing that is actually going to bring the most value if we bring it in? Because we do not have infinite resources to make a true Swiss Army knife that covers everything.
So what's on the roadmap for OmicSoft? What comes next?
We're still very excited about the new APIs. I think we've been very successful at our data offerings just by offering the flat files and the graphical user interface. But the APIs that were built are designed to make it as easy as possible to mine the data in ways that you normally wouldn't, and you especially wouldn't be able to with homebrew solutions. There are a couple of key capabilities, including the graceful handling of missing fields and tables across databases, so that instead of just kind of getting an error and you have to spend hours in troubleshooting, it's just going to handle those missing values, and you just get a bigger table, kind of the ideal version of a big integrated database. So I think there's a lot of improvements that we can add in there. I think we have some new data on the roadmap that are just, again, responding to customer requests. I think we can spend a lot of more focus on enabling new users to get into the data, with new graphical user interfaces. But really the biggest impact is continued integration of our different data offerings. OmicSoft is one slice of the data portfolio with a focus on curated omics data, but we also have a massive knowledge graph of curated biomedical relationships that underlies the IPA software. And, data scientists just need these kinds of relationships as a knowledge graph. And so we can improve the integration there, as well as with our curated variant databases.
Are there any other visions for the future that you have that you'd like to share, either from the perspective of OmicSoft and QIAGEN and where you all are going, or where you see the biotech landscape going?
I think it's just important to remove as many of those barriers as possible towards good data. That's what we're trying to move forward and make it easy for people to get real insights out of these massive repositories of data.
Well, Joseph, really appreciate you joining the podcast today. Are there any other places where people should look out to find you?
The QIAGEN website is a good place to find about the product. It's all about the QIAGEN Digital Insights product line and the webinars that we've got routinely going on showing what you can do with these good data.
Ready. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Look forward to connecting down the line.
And that's it for this episode of Data in Biotech. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate, or leave a review in your podcast platform of choice. See you next time.